We're here today with Dave Rubin, who teaches guitar in New York City and who has a profile on FindaGuitarTeacher.com. Good morning, Dave. Thanks for being with us today.
Good morning, James. Thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure.
It's a real pleasure to be here with you. You were mentioning when we were speaking before the interview that you've been teaching guitar lessons a long time and that you also have authored many books on guitar. Can you describe a little bit your teaching and your writing?
Yes, that's correct, James, in terms of the longevity here. I've been very fortunate. I enjoy the teaching with my private students and in the books, both 35 plus years. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 books at this point. For 26 years, I've been writing for the Hal Leonard Corporation and a few others. And they add up. You know, I always have 2 or 3 projects going. And it's been a great opportunity for me. Like I say, I'm inspired by my students. I'm inspired by others. And each day I wake up, I feel fortunate to be able to play the guitar. After family and close friends, this is my greatest love.
That's wonderful, Dave. And I wonder if you could tell us where you teach in New York City.
Okay, this is my apartment at 28th and 3rd in the Murray Hill section. And I have this is my home studio. I give my lessons here, and I also do my writing. It's kind of a home office studio.
Wonderful. And do all your students come to you, or do you ever travel to your students' homes?
No, I don't, James. I really need to have all of my teaching materials here. You know, I have all my CDs and also vinyl. I have to admit, I still have quite a vinyl collection in the turntable right here in front of me. And I never know really what I'm going to use beyond the basic plan. Because what I'm teaching has so much to do with improvisation. I like to improvise as a teacher. I feel the reason people take private lessons is we can digress. We can go where sometimes the student wants to go. I always have a plan, but always open to a suggestion from the students. And sometimes they come in often with very good ideas. Or I might think of something that happened with somebody's birthday, Robert Johnson, for instance, like wearing on my shirt.
Yes, I noticed.
Robert Johnson. We can go on about Robert Johnson for quite a bit. I can tell you I've had a lot of adventures with his music and all the people around him.
Of course.
As far as to be able to, I like to be able to, again, sometimes, improvise the lesson as well. Again, it's why I think people take private lessons, is because it's that direct interaction with the student and listening to what they're saying and what they have to bring to the lesson as well, and something might be on their mind. And I have vast resources here with my CDs, vinyl, and books. So the long answer to your question is it's not really practical for me to go to someone's home. They come here.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I know that it seems that in your own playing and in the writing you've done that your focus has been very heavily on blues music. Do you focus on blues in your guitar teaching, or do you teach a variety of styles?
Blues and classic rock, James, which is what my students like to play. A little bit of jazz. I'm kind of a closet jazz player.
Yes.
A bit of country music, because I've done books. I've done some jazz books and I've done some country books. In fact, I'm a Jerry Reed book at the moment. So I do a little bit of that, but blues and the broader spectrum of it. An interesting phenomenon has occurred in the last few years, which I'm not even sure exactly why. It used to be 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, everybody wanted to play, everybody wanted to be Eric Clapton, let's say. One of my early idols as well.
Of course.
Stevie Ray, again, one of our great idols. The last few years, and it coincides with what I play myself, people want to play acoustic blues. They want to play fingerstyle. They want to play acoustic blues. Many more people than I've ever had in the past. I mean, people still would, of course, they'd love to play like Stevie Ray or Clapton or Buddy Guy. You could name them.
Right. That's a very interesting phenomenon. I wasn't aware of that. So obviously people returning to a deeper roots form of the blues in the last few years.
They are, and, and playing acoustic instruments, which I think is healthy. I've actually, in my own personal playing, have been doing more of that. And whereas in the past I played with many electric blues bands and rock bands, classic rock bands, and would still do that if a good opportunity came along, but I've actually become much more interested in playing solo. And the occasional gigs that I get that way, I have a booking agent sometimes gets me parties, private.
Yes.
That's what I've been playing. It's just sort of a coincidence. It's coincided with my students' interest in that kind of music. I haven't promoted it necessarily. They've come to me with it. I'm not sure why, James. I don't know. Broader interest in some acoustic roots bands, maybe even some of the more popular bands. I don't know. Mumford, those kind of bands, I guess.
That's true, and it's hard to tell where these things come from, but it gets in the air, and then you start seeing it everywhere you turn.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about your students? What age range of students do you teach? Do you teach children as well as adults, or is it more adults that you teach?
It's way more adults, James. Though I would love to teach children who are interested in this. I would say, maybe what's the youngest I've ever had? Maybe 12 years old, but not recently. My students tend to be grown-ups who have maybe played when they were younger in high school or college.
Mm-hmm.
They've got families, they have careers, and now they have some time and the money to go buy a nice guitar and take some lessons. Now, many of my students are in finance or advertising,
Yeah.
professional people, but not exclusively. And I have some high school students who come for lessons, but not really young children. Being as much as my focus is mainly on the blues,
Of course.
classic rock, and again some jazz, some country. And when I say the blues too, James, I like to make it clear that
Of
I'm
course.
using a broad umbrella there. Soul music, rhythm and blues,
Yes.
funk. I happen to be a big James Brown fan.
Of course.
We could make mention of the recent movie, which was very interesting.
That's right. That just came out a little while ago, didn't it?
Yeah, and electric and acoustic guitar and slide guitar, all kind of all the subgenres.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Dave. When you say the blues, that is at this point a very wide range of music with a common source, but it covers a lot of different styles.
It does, and of course, I'm sure all guitar players know this or should know. It's not just the roots; it's the great American classic art form, but it is its own, of course, extremely worthwhile style of music itself.
Yeah, you won't get any argument from me on that one. I feel exactly the same way. Well, can you tell us about your lessons? How often do you meet with students, and how long are your lessons?
Generally once a week, James. The lessons are an hour. Most come every week. Some come every other week. And then I'll have two students, at least I try to have two students share the same spot, and they alternate every week. But most efficient for me, and actually keeps them on a schedule as well. Again, the lessons are an hour long. And I generally like to, we'll do a review when they come in of the previous lesson or previous lessons and any questions that they have. And then we'll go into that week's lessons, which again could change on the spot.
Yes.
And my students seem to like that. And we do a lot of playing here. The hour gives me enough time that I always try to set aside, at least at the end of the last 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes longer, where we'll play together, where I mostly play rhythm and my students get to solo, and we actually get to put into practical application what we've been working on. I have a drum machine that I use.
Wonderful.
We get a pretty good jam going.
That's wonderful. And what you said about like the lessons going in unpredictable directions, I'd say nothing could sum up the nature of music itself more than that too. It sounds like the lessons reflect the music itself.
Yeah, they do. That's a good way to put it.
And and I was wondering, what are your fees for an hour lesson?
The fee is $60.
Yes.
Pay as you go. No
Hmm.
obligation as to number of lessons. Um, I think that's a reasonable fee in this day and age, and I think with my experience, which is pretty vast at this point, I think it's a fair amount. I know that there are others who charge more. My opinion on that, James, is my students tend to stay with me a long time,
Yes.
get a lot of turnover. It's been mostly word of mouth, and now through Find a Guitar Teacher. Uh,
Yes.
but mostly word of mouth. And I have students who have stayed with me for as long as 10 years, but most certainly stay for several years. My point being, I think it's best for the student. We develop a relationship, and I often become friends almost with all of my students, and they stay in touch. For me, I also think it's better not to have that constant turnover, or perhaps a higher fee, would warrant that, especially in this economy too.
I can understand that, and to develop that long-term relationship with a student, the way you teach and the way you charge allows you to do that. Seems like it allows you to go deeper with each individual student.
It does. It does. And I like that too.
And I'd like to ask you, you're someone who has a vast amount of experience both with in-person guitar lessons and also the form of guitar lessons in the form of books. I was wondering how the two forms of teaching have influenced each other in your experience.
That's a very good question.
And if they have, they might be just such different ways of approaching it that you might not have thought about that. But I was very curious about it reading your Find a Guitar Teacher profile.
Well, topics have been suggested by my
Ah,
students. For one thing, I feel like I sort of I'm able to keep my pulse on what students are interested in. And like I said before, it used to be all like the heavy electric blues, and that
mhm.
still probably is the main interest, I would say, but not by a lot. So by students coming in and wanting to play more acoustic blues, wanting to learn Robert Johnson, and that's for tends to be for the more advanced ones. Those
Of
except for
course.
maybe Sweet Home Chicago, which is not too difficult. That's more advanced. That's definitely more advanced playing. I don't think anybody would argue with that if they've ever tried to play his songs.
That's
Uh,
right.
so my students' interest in the pre-war and acoustic blues and fingerstyle has led to me suggesting that we do some of those books with Hal Leonard, my publisher, and I've done the 12-bar blues fingerstyle book.
Oh, that's wonderful.
As well as actually, I didn't suggest this, but you might find this interesting, a ukulele blues book.
I do find that very interesting. I've never thought of that.
Played it. I had never played it, and it apparently is this worldwide ukulele boom. Now, I'm not saying that my students are coming to me for ukulele lessons. No one is doing that, and I've not actually done that in person, but I did do a book. But I think it just shows where things are going.
That is very interesting. I've noticed that there's been a boom in ukulele, but I haven't heard anyone talking about playing the blues on ukulele. So that sounds like a fascinating book.
Oh, thank you. It's done well. I enjoy doing it. I had never played the ukulele. Maybe as a kid somebody had one and
Right.
had no idea what I was doing on it. You know, and so I bought a ukulele and we did it in standard tuning and the standard. I guess it's the soprano uke. Uh,
Right.
and I did a book, and it's done well. I think guitar players could learn something from it. To tell you the truth, it was a learning experience for me because I had to rethink if anybody seeing this would try to play the ukulele, you know that the what we would consider the low string here is actually the high string, and you know we're used to or you know we like to have that, especially for solo blues, and if you
Right.
played where you don't have that. Digressing a bit now, even with our interview.
No, no, this is all great, and I was thinking what a good experience it was for you to have that opportunity to write a book about both what you knew, but also what you were learning at the same time.
It was. It made me rethink some things, and it was a good learning experience. You know, James, I learn something every day. I've been doing this a long time, as you've acknowledged. And again, I feel fortunate to be able to be involved in music this way. I learn something every day. I feel there's so much more to learn, and I'm a real student of the music, as you may know if you've seen the books that I do. Very much into the history of it. I'm always trying to learn that. The readers seem to like that a lot. But again, there's so much more. I think we're all students, and I learn from my students, actually. And they'll come in with something they heard somewhere, or somebody showed them, and I'm like, oh, I never thought of it, looking at it that way. As you know, there's so many ways to play the same thing or on the guitar.
There really are. Well, it was great to hear you play just a little bit a second ago. Could you play a little bit more and show us what you might be showing a student, or what you would like to play when you sit down and play guitar on your own? It would be wonderful to hear you play some blues.
Okay, I'd be happy to. I was going to say, you know, where we start, and my students generally tend not to be absolute beginners. I don't mind beginners. I'd like to make that clear.
Yeah.
Beginner, fine. It's the desire to play. That's what I'm looking for in a student. If you do have the desire to play, we can start from zero or near it. But I tend not to, just because I think, again, it's the style of the music. I'm not teaching pop songs.
Right.
Though the classic rock was the pop song of the day, but maybe not now. So we might start with, you know, this typical, typical boogie thing like this. And then, of course, I'm going to change keys here from that E to G. You know, we're going to start with, we got to play that minor pentatonic scale, which after 150 years of blues, because that's so close to the blues scale.
Yes.
No one's tired of playing that yet, and you can do everything you want. But we'll go into the other scales as well. A couple of the modes, Aeolian mode for the natural minor scale, and then the related Dorian mode is what I call the composite blues scale, which is the blues scale or minor pentatonic with the Mixolydian mode, which is for dominant chords, and then we end up with, you know, that B.B. King. But Clapton learned so much from.
Sure.
So, you know, we work our way through those, and one of the most important things, I would pass it on even now to viewers of this interview, is you must be aware of the chord changes. It's all about, I think this goes for all soloing in any style of music, of course. At least hear it. You don't even have to know the names, but hear it. You're hearing those chords change. In the blues, basically 3 chords. But they tell a story themselves, those 12 bars of blues. There's a beginning with the 1 chord, and then it's to the 4, and then back to the 1, and you have that critical juncture of the 5 chord in measure 9, where after you've built up to that, if you look at it visually, and I have an art background, so I see things visually, I would digress to say that I think still everybody learns, most people learn, let's say outside of classical musicians, by the shapes. We learn visually on the neck, and I'm very much for that. I'm digressing a little bit here too. I'm happy to talk theory with my students. I don't push it. I don't think you have to know a lot of theory. If you know a little bit, it can help you understand how songs are written. You know, the harmonized scale. What is the relationship between the do, re, mi scale and the chords? You can make chords out of each one of them. So getting back to the blues, eventually, yes, you might be thinking 1, 4, 5, etc. But just to be able to hear it and realize that all those great solos that we all love from the people I've mentioned and more, one of the things that makes them so great and why we love hearing them is even if those people, especially the older blues players, probably didn't know any theory at all, but they heard it, and that's more important. You're always relating to the chords. So we'll talk about that. So we'll talk about, and I'm going to play it solo here. I'm not. All my students don't necessarily do this, but
Of
so
course.
you have your what a G7 chord as I'm playing here. We go to the 4 chord without going through an explanation of really what notes I'm playing here. I'm thinking. At this point, I don't have to think, but I'm for purposes of explaining, I am thinking. I want to lead into the next chord. I'm here again. I'll play the C up here now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't resist when the bass comes. And my 5. Back to the 4. So again, now that's not necessarily the way my students would be playing the chords and the licks following them, but they do. And the ones who want to play that, and almost anybody who hears somebody, any of my students hear me do that, or see somebody, that's what they want to do.
I know what you mean, Dave.
You're playing all by yourself. So I do a lot of that myself, certainly warm-ups. Just a little bit of a taste of that sort of thing, and swing.
Of course.
Which I think is a bit of a lost art these days. We'll do things like that, and sometimes I'll solo around that as well.
That's wonderful, Dave. I'm sorry to cut in. I'd love to hear you play a lot more, but we'll need to wrap up the interview in a second. But it's great to hear you play so much guitar and to learn more about your guitar teaching and all the writing that you have done as well of the books about the blues and all its various forms. Plus, you said some jazz and some country, and even recently a book about the blues played on ukulele. It's been a great learning experience for me to hear you describe all these things.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, James.
Well,
I can go on and on, as you can see. I'm used to talking and I'm used to writing, so I can go on forever about this topic.
And it's wonderful to hear you go on about the topic. I could listen for a lot longer myself. But obviously, people who get in touch with you for lessons will have all of your knowledge to learn from, and any student who comes to you wanting to learn the blues has obviously come to a very knowledgeable and talented guitar teacher.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Dave, for taking the time in your schedule to talk with us, and best of luck to you in your guitar playing and teaching and the writing. And we look forward to seeing you very soon on Find a Guitar Teacher.
Thank you, James. I look forward to it myself.